Well, I think in the first place, the Astana negotiations were much more a reflection of the fighting powers on the ground. And the fact that we were in a situation of war, we were not in a situation of political transition. So quite naturally, if you want, the Astana meeting is a reflection of that. I don't think that they will be replacing the Geneva negotiations per se, because we will still need, if you want, the formal UN framework to have some form of process. And if we do suppose that at one point of time in the not too distant future, we manage to get a broad ceasefire in large parts of Western Syria, we may then see some form of cosmetic, at least political negotiations, and therefore the Geneva meetings negotiations would be important. So I think we are very much still in a situation where we may, in a transition period, if you want, we may still see some several rounds of the Astana meetings, but at the same time, I think we will see a resumption and more importance given to the Geneva negotiations, probably starting next year, or say at least after some form of stabilization in most parts of Western Syria. Well, I think the Russian-US agreement over southern Syria is very much a translation of the shared objectives and now strategies of the two countries. I think that for long the two countries had more or less the same objectives in Syria, that is protecting the border with Israel, fighting ISIS and other Qaeda-related groups, and having in Damascus a strong central authority. Now Russia may have probably had other objectives, obviously, but objectives related to its relation with the US, not directly related to the Syrian battles. But at the end of the day, on Syria, the two countries had the same objectives, I think, but they had probably some form of different strategies. Now, the agreement over the southern Syria reflects the convergence of these strategies today. Clearly, the main loser is Iran, although one has to say that Iran has not prioritized, over the course of the past few years, the fight over the southern part of Syria, probably because it felt that it would probably be too costly to go south and face a potential Israeli retaliation. Now that the Iranians have, if you want, won in most of the fronts where they are fighting, you still have, of course, eastern Syria. You could have expected them in the next few months to be targeting the south, which with this agreement would be something much more complicated. So yes, to some extent, the US-Russian agreement is something that sees Iran losing. I think that neither Russia nor the US has any problem really with facing Iran, or at least with confronting it to some extent. So we still have to wait a bit to see whether the Iranians will have the capacity, both political and military, to confront that. Yes, of course, the Syrian regime does retain some power on the ground. The Syrian regime is much weaker than it was. The regime is one player among others, while obviously prior to 2011 it was the only player. But it still has a role. For both Russia and Iran, it represents legitimacy, and that is important for them. Bashar and his group of security and army officers do have a control over a big number of militias, so they still retain a role. I don't believe that Russia or Iran can dictate whatever they want, and to a certain extent I would argue that the fact that you have two foreign sponsors, both Russia and Iran, gives the regime some margin of maneuvers between them. So to some extent, the support of two different countries gives the regime more rather than less power. Obviously, it is a much weakened regime, but very much a regime that has still has some cards in hand.